Welcome to episode 284 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. My special guest in this episode is Brody Buhler. Brody is the CEO at Escher Group, and we're going to talk about Escher Group's recent Future of Posts research. In particular, a few of the main themes, including returns, omnichannel, the diversification in the postal network, and cross-border. So some really meaty topics to get into. So coming up right now, Brody Buhler, CEO at Escher Group. Joining me on the line is Brody Buhler. Brody is the CEO at Escher Group. Brody, we're going to delve into some interesting research that Escher's been doing into the postal world, the delivery world, even the post office world a little bit. It's part of the Future of Posts research that Escher does. Can you just give us a quick overview, Brody, before we get into the detail? Give us an overview of what this report is and how you compile
it. Absolutely. And Ian, thanks for having me today. It's good to be with you. The Future of Post report is research that we've done here at Escher for the last 4 years. That is a survey of senior leadership within the postal industry, looking at key trends and areas that are impacting them. This last year, I think it was roughly 190 participants across something like 85 posts. So it's a worldview, very tailored and specific to postal organizations of what's happening in the market.
Well, Brody, we're going to talk about 5 of the big themes that have come out of this research. And I think they're really intriguing themes as well as we enter this, can we call it post-pandemic world? I think there's a different approach to we hope we can. There's a post-pandemic world and what it means for the postal and delivery world. So let's start with this idea of, I think you've called it a tale of two networks. What does that really mean? What are you talking about when you talk about this two network idea?
So obviously it's the two postal networks, the retail network and the delivery network. And as we've done the research this past year, one of the questions we asked was, what's your plan for those networks? And 37%, which was the highest vote getter on the delivery side, said we're going to accelerate expansion. And the rest of the responses were all about that area, right? Expansion and using that network as a strategic advantage. Now, when we asked the question on the retail network side, perhaps not surprisingly, the biggest vote getter was 35%, said, we're not sure what to do with that network. And those answers tended to be around either postponing or shrinking or reevaluating the network. And so you've got these two networks that are really in very different places. Posts have good clarity on how to get value and advantage out of their delivery network. And I think they're struggling a little bit about how to get those same things, value and advantage, out of the retail network. And we have seen a few that have been very successful in that. Broadly, we're seeing some reevaluation.
When it comes to reevaluation, did your research dig into what are some of the questions post office network operators are asking themselves, whether it's where should the post offices be, how many should they be, do we operate them ourselves or with a partner, and those sorts of things?
We looked at a number of elements around this. One of those is, what is your strategy for providing the access? When you have that strategy, what are you using as the technology within that access? What is the diversification strategy, and how might you use diversification as a tool to get better value and advantage out of the retail network? So we looked at it from a number of different perspectives as we try to hone in on what is the right answer when it comes to really taking advantage of that network. And it tends to come down to a few key things. One is around making the service models tailored to the type of transaction. So instead of a model where kind of everybody queues up and stands and gets to the counter and the clerk helps them, having mobile capabilities and self-serve capabilities, and then some things that really do need attendant an attendant transaction, have the clerk handle those higher value, higher need transactions. So that's one. And another is really making the delivery and retail networks work together. And that is a fantastic way to get expanded capacity and better productivity and cost profiles for delivery, as well as getting more foot traffic and interaction at the retail. So the synergy between those networks is where we're seeing a lot of posts really create new value.
I think that's a great point. Talking about really integrating those two networks. It's how the post office network was formed in many respects, as the post office was that local node of the delivery network. And it's like the pendulum has swung towards the sort of a pure retail business. It's swung back towards delivery. And that sort of leads in nicely to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which was about this theme of exploiting returns. Returns is, well, as e-commerce has grown, returns have grown. So what does it mean for the post office network?
So you're absolutely right, Ian. Returns has become a far bigger problem for retailers and a far bigger opportunity for postal organizations. For example, 218 billion last year of lost revenue due to returns. The research we've done suggests that a significant number, 79%, of consumers expect that return to be free, and retailers understand why that return has to come tailored to the consumer, because of the remarkable impact it has on total lifetime value and repeat purchases, and keeping loyalty. And so because returns has become so important and is growing so quickly, we've got a lot of postal organizations that are starting to reevaluate how they handle returns and their strategy for really taking advantage of the growth in the market that they're seeing.
So when we're talking about returns, what kind of role does the post office play? Is it purely as a drop-off point, or is there technology that needs to sit behind that to make returns better for consumers?
So when we asked the question to the postal executives as to what are you investing in around reverse logistics, the two most prominent responses, both of these getting about 2/3 of the respondents, were either offering alternate locations or a home pickup. Now, research with the retailers would suggest, I think it's 62% of consumers would buy more if there was a physical location to return to. That physicality creates a level of confidence and certainty that inspires them to feel more comfortable to buy more. And so offering alternative locations is clearly an important element of that strategy, because if you've got that ubiquitous, easy to access, low friction network, then you're going to make for a very positive return experience. The second of those, though, that home pickup, is one that is new, is lightly deployed today. There's a few posts that have experimented a little bit with this, and most have really continued to focus on the physical locations. But that home pickup is the premier return experience, in my opinion. What I really want from a return experience is I want to be able to open an app, select what I'm returning, and the next question it asks me is, when do you want it picked up? And then I want to be done. I want to put it in a box, stick it on my doorstep, and let the problem be taken care of from there. And postal organizations are extremely well suited to offer a solution like that. The integration with retailers is pretty straightforward to allow for the visibility of the order profile or the order history. And they're coming by my house anyway. They've got the technology that would allow for payment if I need to pay, or to debit an account if the retailer is paid. And they've got the ability to very low cost pick that up and bring that back. So this home pickup, I think, it's interesting to see that it got such a response, because it is the best return solution. And post organizations have a remarkable competitive advantage in their ability to deliver that at the right price points.
One of the points that some posts have made over the years is, as there are less letters in the postie's delivery bag, what can we do to fill up that bag? The response has in part been, well, deliver some parcels. But the other response can also be doing pickups.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, isn't it? This intersection between different problems that need to be solved. Is the post then in the right place at the right time to solve this problem?
Absolutely. And returns used to be a small portion of the overall profile. There were times in the recent past where the cost of the return was baked into the just the contract, right? Whatever you were being charged for sending, for the small portion that came back, it was just part of it. And now it's become so prominent that it can't be handled in that way any longer. It's got to be treated as a separate product. Postal organizations are, in my opinion, perfectly positioned to take advantage of those changes.
Let's move on to this next theme of omnichannel. What do you mean by this? Are you talking about posts becoming having an omnichannel offering to customers that walk through the door?
This gets back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier in the tale of two networks. Postal organizations traditionally, and in particular the retail traditionally, had one mode of operation, right? You walk into the post office, you queue up, you talk to somebody behind the counter. COVID disrupted all of that and brought a few elements that are new. One just interesting thing to think about is, pre-COVID, luxury was high touch, high engagement, high interaction, right? You walk into a store and you're immediately working with somebody. During COVID, luxury flipped, and luxury was no touch, right? I don't need to interact with anybody. I can get what I want without a human interaction, because everybody's so nervous about those. So what's persisted there is this idea that I should be able to, in a very frictionless, easy way, access the services that I want in the way that I want to access those. And so when we talk about this omnichannel, it's about having the right channels of interaction and technology to support those channels of interaction for the right engagement. You think of a simple transaction like mailing a cross-border parcel, and we'll get to kind of the challenges with cross-border are also something that we study, but that can be a lengthy transaction at the window as they're asking me a whole bunch of questions about, who am I sending to, and the phone number of the person I'm sending it to, and all this data that's needed for the transaction to occur per the customs organizations. Those are things that I could easily fill out either at home and then bring it so it's pre-populated, or while I'm queuing. And so what would it look like if on my phone I could open up and answer all those questions, present a QR code at the end of that mobile transaction to the clerk, scans it, all of that's filled out. The only question they ask is, do you want it there, in 3 days or 5 days or 2 weeks? And I swipe my card and I'm off. That takes that from a transaction that's multiple minutes to a transaction that is more like multiple seconds. And I've had a better experience, and so has everybody behind me in the line. And that's what we mean by this omnichannel, is really being able to interact across channels with picking up and starting the transaction across them.
And that's a great example you've just shared as well. I know there's a number of postal operators with that precise pain point. How do you get the data entered by the consumer online in advance of getting to the counter, to take away the drudgery and all the errors that can be associated with data entry at the counter? So that's one part of it. But Another conversations that we've had over the past year or two, Brady, we've been talking about the customer experience as well. So how does this question of omnichannel and technology, either in-store, how does all that interact when it comes to customer experience?
Customer experience is the highest priority. When we asked postal organizations what they were focused on, 73% put improving the customer experience is the thing to work on when it came to their retail experience. And the second highest vote getter was 38%, and that's reducing queues. So making that experience, improving that experience in the retail branches in particular is critically important for Post. An element of that has got to be what's done with self-serve options. And a couple things become evident as you look at that. One of them is the self-serve needs to be intuitive and engender confidence in the transaction. And the more of that can be done for the person, the more likely my grandmother is to use it, for example. And so one of the things we're prototyping now here at Escher is, can we have what I call a one-click self-serve experience, where I put the package on the scale, it weighs it, it dimensions it, the cameras in the back OCR the sender and receiver information. And so everything then pops up on the screen and asks you to just review it. And if that's all correct, then you just choose when you want it to arrive, swipe your card, and you're off. That's a very different transaction than somebody like my grandmother who's sitting there thinking, did I enter this all right, all correctly? Is this really going to get there? You know what? I'm just going to take this and go queue up and make sure the clerk helps me. So that's one, is making it intuitive. The other is the presence of self-serve. You drive adoption with better presence of self-serve. And what I mean by that is, if you have one kiosk, you're going to get a little bit of adoption. If you have two kiosks, it exponentially grows, far more than you would see from just kind of doubling the presence. And there's something about it being accessible and always accessible that drives a remarkably different adoption curve. And so that presence is another element of it. And the best way to get that is some of the things that we've talked about previously, right? Making light versions of the self-serve that are fit for purpose, so that it doesn't have the full range of transactions that maybe a more robust kiosk would have, but allows for certain types of transactions to be done quickly, efficiently, without friction, and takes those out of the queue and out of the broader profile self-serve, where you've got a more full service sort of experience. So making them fit for purpose is becoming more and more important to drive ubiquity.
Let's move on to the theme of diversification. What have you found that's happening in terms of diversification in the postal world?
So this is a question we've asked over every time we've done this research, and the profile has changed dramatically. If you go pre-pandemic, areas like government services and financial services were relatively closely scoring with things like e-commerce and grocery delivery. In the latest research, e-commerce by far got the most votes. Almost 80% said e-commerce is the diversification agenda. And those other things like financial services and government services and identity and those sorts of areas were kind of in the 20s. And then behind those were things like pharma and grocery that used to score well, that were priorities prior to the pandemic, and now are much lower priorities. What's interesting to me is, in that grocery pharma space, those deliveries tend to be local. And because they tend to be local, we're seeing a different crop of competitors there, which are venture capital-backed startups that are trying to connect in a local delivery model. E-commerce deliveries historically have been very different and are moving to become much more like those grocery or pharma deliveries, where they're far more likely to be local, either from a store or from a micro fulfillment center. And so what we see is this biggest diversification strategy, right, of e-commerce starting to look a lot like this area that has been underrepresented and underinvested from postal organizations, where there's a new host of competitors. And postal organizations are extremely well suited to do local to local delivery, much more so than any of those startups. But if they don't act quickly, if they don't rework some of the capabilities that they have, then they're going to cede that ground to those startups. They'll get to scale, they'll get to profitability, and then you've got a real problem because now you've got a formidable competitor in this local to local space, and you have far less competitive advantage than you had previously.
Is this a space where posts should be looking perhaps at partnerships?
They could. I think they have all the capability they need to do it themselves. And postal organizations have the most compelling economics when it comes to a local to local delivery. They can do that type of delivery less expensively than anybody else out there. It kind of gets back to the point you made earlier, Ian, that the post office used to be the local node for delivery. Take advantage of that, right? Use those post offices with the postmen in that synergistic way to connect local to local. One of the things that gets in the way of that today is the pickup capabilities that we were talking about for returns. But if I had a robust pickup and delivery capability operating with my delivery network and using those retail nodes appropriately, you can get a local delivery, right? Local to local delivery that's under €1 in a lot of these geographies. It's the math is just really compelling if you get it right.
Let's move on to our final theme, which is cross-border. So tell us, Brody, what has the research unearthed when it comes to cross-border?
So as everybody's probably very well aware, cross-border has become very challenging. Volumes are down in every geography that we analyzed. That's a function of the new regulatory requirements that have come in, ICS2 in Europe, the STOP Act in the US. There's similar regulations in APAC, as well as what's happened with the UPU, and it's kind of changed the pricing around those. When we ask the question of what are the challenges, most important challenges in cross-border, they were all around real-time calculation of duties and taxes, and transit times, right? Making that transaction more transparent and making it faster, because expectations are changing that a cross-border delivery from a timing standpoint looks a lot more like a domestic delivery. So that's where we're seeing postal organizations focus right now, is how to make those transactions more transparent, more DDP, delivery duty paid sorts of solutions that allow for seamless transit through customs organizations and getting to the consumer's hands faster.
So another part of cross-border is the idea of the returns. We talked about returns earlier. Well, when it comes to cross-border returns, is that putting a brake on the growth of cross-border e-commerce?
It's certainly becoming a more important element of the transaction. This is looking across a number of geographies. The question was asked, how likely are you to abandon a cross-border transaction because of the return process? And in the only geography where we didn't see that increase 10 to 15% was China. So yes, returns is putting a brake on those transactions, and getting that right, having the right tailored returns experience by consumer, so you're able to make it a very seamless, easy to do transaction for your high value, important to retain consumers, and maybe a little bit more friction in it for those consumers that are less likely to have a long-term value to you.
Well, Brody, we've covered quite a bit of ground talking about these 5 themes that have come out of the Future of Posts report from Escher. And I guess people who want to get more detail out of this, where should they go to download the full report?
So the report can be found at our website, eschergroup.com. There you'll find a link, and it'll ask you for some details that will put you then on the list where the additional research will automatically be sent to you. So once a quarter, we're sending updates to this research, and that'll get you on that distro as well as the original report.
And I'll stick a link to that on thepostalhub.com. So if you want to go to the episode page for this episode, you'll see the link there to get more information about the Future of Posts research from Escher Group. Brody Buhler, CEO at Escher Group. Thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you, Ian. It's been great to be with you.
Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Johan Peters will be joining me. He was part of the team behind the bpost EcoZone project. We're going to talk about eco delivery and stuff like that. Really interesting conversation. Stay tuned for that one coming very soon. In the meantime, remember to sign up for my email newsletter. Go to thepostalhub.com. You can sign up there for my emails that come out every time I release a new episode. Or if you really love email and you want to get one from me every day, sign up for the Daily Delivery Digest, which is a daily email, and it has all the headlines from the delivery world delivered direct to your inbox every day. Sign up for each of them, either, both, whatever. They're both there on thepostalhub.com. If you're on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn. That way you get other stuff in your LinkedIn feed other than some of that stupid motivational nonsense that people post on LinkedIn. Not that I have a particular, axe to grind on that topic, but there you go. It's just one of the things that grinds my gears. What else? I don't know. I can tell you all kinds of other stuff, but if you want to email me, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.